When I found out my parents drained my daughter's $68,000 surgery fund, I didn't cry. I planned revenge. Stay with me till the end, because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about money. It's about trust, betrayal, and what a mother will do when someone hurts her child. My name is Kara Ellison. I'm 32 years old and live in Colorado with my little girl, Lila. She's 6, bright eyes, soft curls, and a heart that beats unevenly because she was born with a congenital defect. Doctors said she needed surgery before she turned 7, or her chances would fade. That number, $68000, became my life's goal. I worked 2 jobs, cut every corner, and saved every spare dollar for that surgery. Every night when I came home exhausted, Lila would hand me her crayon drawings and say, "Is this for my heart, Mommy?" I'd smile and say yes. When the day finally came, I thought we were ready. The hospital called to confirm the payment before scheduling her surgery. But the woman on the phone sounded confused. She said they hadn't received the transfer. I told her she must be mistaken. I had already asked my parents to handle the deposit. I hung up and opened the banking app, my heart pounding. The joint account I had set up with my parents, the one that held Lila's entire surgery fund, showed a balance of 0. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, thinking it had to be a glitch. Then I saw the withdrawal record, transferred to another account under my father's name. I called my mom first. She answered cheerfully, asking about Lila, but when I brought up the money, her tone changed. She said, "Oh, that. Your father needed to use it for a business emergency. Don't worry, sweetheart, we'll put it back soon." My hands started shaking. "That was for Lila's surgery," I said. "You had no right." She sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Kara, we're family. It's not like it's gone forever. You always overreact." I hung up before I could scream. My dad texted me later, saying it was a temporary loan. A loan from my child's chance to live. That night, I sat in Lila's room watching her sleep, listening to her soft, uneven breathing. I should have been angry. I should have cried. But I didn't. I just felt cold inside, like something had died quietly. I thought about all the times my parents told me they'd take care of me, how they'd insisted I put the money in the family account for safety. I believed them. I trusted them. And they stole from a sick child. That was the moment I decided, if they could betray me once, I'd make sure they'd never have the chance again. They might have taken my daughter's money, but I was going to make them pay the real price. Growing up, I thought my parents were the kind of people everyone wished they had. My dad, Russell, was strict but fair, and my mom, Janet, was the one who made sure everything in our house ran perfectly. They always talked about loyalty, family first, and responsibility. "Family is everything, Kara," my mom would say when I was a kid. "No one will ever care for you like your parents do." And I believed her. I was the kind of daughter who never questioned them. When my friends complained about their parents, I stayed quiet. I thought mine were different, honest, hardworking, dependable. My father ran a small real estate business, and my mother managed the household like a CEO. Everything seemed perfect from the outside. Then life changed when I lost my husband, Ben. It was sudden, a car accident on a snowy night. One moment we were planning our future, the next I was alone, holding a baby with a heart condition. I was drowning in grief and medical bills, trying to balance 2 jobs while pretending I was strong enough for both of us. That's when my parents stepped in, offering help like they always did. "Let us take care of the money, sweetheart," my mom said one night, her voice soft and convincing. "You've got too much on your plate already. We'll make sure everything's safe." I remember hesitating. That money, every dollar, meant everything. It was for Lila's surgery, not for anyone else. But I was so tired. Tired of juggling bills, tired of doing math at 2 a.m, tired of feeling like every mistake could cost my daughter her future. I wanted to believe someone could take that burden from me, even for a little while. Dad promised they'd keep the fund in a separate family account, just until things settled down. "You know we'd never let anything happen to Lila," he said. His voice had that steady tone that always made me feel like a child again, safe, small, taken care of. So I agreed. I signed the papers, transferred the money, and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. For months, I didn't worry. I thought I'd done the responsible thing. I thought I was protecting my daughter the way any mother should. But looking back, I can see how they'd been shaping me for this my whole life. Teaching me to depend on them, to trust them blindly, to believe that family was the only thing that mattered. They'd built an image of perfection so strong that I never learned to question their motives. When they stole that money, it wasn't just a single act of greed. It was the breaking point of a lifetime of quiet control. I used to think their lessons were about love and loyalty, but now I see they were about power. They didn't just take my daughter's fund. They took the trust I'd been building since the day I was born. I went to their house with the bank statement printed, and my hands trembling so badly the paper shook. I didn't want to believe what the numbers showed, but every line screamed the same truth. The account was emptied, and the money moved out in one neat transfer. I waited in the kitchen while my mother put the kettle on like everything was normal. My father sat at the table, sorting mail, looking like the man I'd always known. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where is Lila's money?" I asked. My mother's smile didn't reach her eyes. "What money, honey?" she said, slow and soft, as if I'd misunderstood. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. My father's face flushed. He looked at the table and then back at me. "Kara, we only borrowed it," he said. "Temporary. We'll put it back. You know how business is, there were expenses." Borrowed. Temporary. I could taste the word like bile. "It wasn't yours to borrow," I said. "That money was for Lila's surgery. You knew that." My mother's hands tightened around the mug until her knuckles whitened. She tilted her head, a practiced look of concern. "You've been through so much, dear. You need to rest." We were helping. When I pushed harder, asking for dates, account numbers, proof they planned to return it, my father pulled a face like someone apologizing for an inconvenience. "We'll fix this," he promised. "I'll get the funds back. Give me a week." His voice was the same even tone I'd heard since childhood. Calm, unshakable, designed to soothe. My mother's disguise slipped. Her lips thinned and her voice hardened. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, louder than before. "After everything we've done, you call us thieves? You always get so worked up. This is about perspective, Kara. Think about what you're saying." She glared at me like a teacher scolding a misbehaving child. "You act like everything revolves around you." The words landed like a slap. I had expected excuses, guilt, maybe tears. I had not expected to be blamed. I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor and walked out without another word. Outside, the cold air hit my face, and I couldn't decide whether I wanted to scream or throw up. My chest ached with a new kind of hurt, betrayal mixed with a burning, hot anger that made my hands clench. That night I didn't sleep. I used the little energy I had to dig deeper. I called the bank and requested a full transaction history. I found payments to contractors, cash withdrawals, and a series of transfers into accounts tied to my father's real estate company. When I traced the paper trail, the picture became ugly and clear. My parents had moved the money to cover payroll and debts for my father's failing business. They called it a rescue. I called it theft. Rage bubbled up so fierce it felt like a physical thing. I thought of Lila's small chest heaving under the hospital lights, of every dollar I'd scraped together. I thought of my mother's cold words. The anger settled into something colder and more determined. I wouldn't let them walk away with this. I promised myself then, quietly like a vow, that I would get that money back. Whatever it took. I started small and quiet, like a mouse in a house that used to be mine. I couldn't barge in and shout accusations. That would only make them hide things faster. So I learned to listen, watching their habits, the patterns of their lives, the little tells that gave away more than words ever could. I went by for lunch more often, brought casseroles, laughed at the same stories, and let them think the old warmth was back. Inside, I was taking notes. I opened a new email under a name they wouldn't know and signed up for newsletters connected to my father's real estate company. I found public filings that showed properties I'd never heard him mention. Some were under shell LLCs. I drew lines between addresses, mortgage records, and the dates my parents said they had used the money. It didn't take long to see gaps. Payments that didn't match income, properties that had been transferred between accounts, and a few clients who had quietly disappeared. On a Wednesday, I drove past the storage unit my father rented. It was tucked behind an old strip mall, the kind of place people never visit unless they have to. I watched from my car until a delivery truck pulled up and my father met the driver, took a box, and slipped it inside. He didn't lock the unit well. Later that week, I called a distant cousin, a cousin I barely knew, who worked in estate sales. I asked casually about a piece of antique jewelry my grandmother had left in a will years ago. The cousin blinked and said, "Oh, that was sold ages ago. Your mom had it appraised and sold it to cover some expenses." I pretended to be surprised, but I felt the world tilt. At night, I sat with a flashlight and a set of files I'd copied secretly from mail that passed through their house. Old receipts, canceled checks, and a few investment statements tucked under a cookbook. My mother had always prided herself on frugality, but the papers told a different story. There were certificates of deposit in odd banks, small accounts opened under nicknames, and receipts for custom jewelry. It wasn't lavish, but it was enough to show they weren't completely penniless. I started to plan how to use their habits against them. My father loved praise. He liked to show off a potential deal, to explain how he could turn $1 into 1,000. My mother loved control. She managed every event, every guest list, every family holiday. I made sure to call them and ask for advice about small things. How to price an old table, whether to refinance a tiny inheritance. They jumped at the chance to help. Janet tightened her grip, offering to bring over paperwork and help organize my finances. Russell offered to go over investment options. They wanted back in. When they invited me to dinner, I went. I let them steeple their fingers and lecture me about patience and prudence. I listened and smiled and took everything they said as if it were gospel. All the while I photographed accounts, copied receipts into my phone, and recorded conversations where they bragged about saving a deal or covering an expense. I hid a small voice recorder in the room the first time my father mentioned transferring funds to keep the business afloat. The clip was plain and damning. I wasn't cruel. I didn't need to be. I only needed proof. Their greed gave me pieces. Their habits gave me answers. I folded those pieces together quietly, like assembling a puzzle no one else knew existed. When the picture was complete, I would decide how to finish it. One Sunday afternoon, I called my parents and told them I wanted to have dinner together. My mother sounded thrilled, her voice suddenly warmer than it had been in months. I could almost hear the smile through the phone. "Of course, honey," she said quickly. "Your father will be so happy to see you." I hung up and took a slow breath. This time, I wasn't walking in as a daughter. I was walking in as someone setting a trap. I arrived with a small box in my hands, pretending it was full of old paperwork. Over dinner, I brought up my late husband, Ben. I told them I had finally decided to sell his old truck, the one sitting in the garage since the accident. My dad nodded solemnly, pretending to understand. My mother gave me a sympathetic look and touched my arm. "That's a big step, Kara," she said softly. "Ben would be proud of you for moving forward." I forced a small smile, playing my part. "Yeah, I think it's time. And well, there's something else. I've been talking to an attorney about a small inheritance Ben's aunt left for Lila. It's not much, but I was thinking of investing it. Maybe doing something smart with it this time." My father leaned forward, eyes suddenly sharper. "You're thinking investments?" I nodded casually, like it was just an idea floating in my head. "I know your business has had a rough time. Maybe there's a way I could help, you know? Something small to get it back on track." The change in their expressions was instant. My mother's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and then she smiled, too quickly. "Oh, sweetheart, that's thoughtful of you, but you don't need to worry about us. Still, if you want to invest, your father can show you how. He's got years of experience." From that moment, she couldn't hide her eagerness. She asked question after question. How much money I had, when I planned to sell the truck, what kind of attorney I was using. She even offered to help with the paperwork, just to make sure it's all done properly. I kept my voice calm, pretending to need their guidance. Inside, I was memorizing every word, every slip. I began sending small, harmless emails asking about investment structures. My mother replied with documents she probably shouldn't have shared, balance sheets, bank records, even scanned copies of signed forms. Each email was neatly saved in a private folder. Every dinner and phone call was recorded on my phone. I collected signatures, scanned business cards, and photographed every page she handed me for my records. Whenever I saw them, I smiled sweetly, just like the obedient daughter they thought they still controlled. My mother started to believe the old bond was mending. My father told relatives that Kara's finally coming around. But the truth was darker. Every handshake, every fake hug, every polite thank you was another step closer to their downfall. I didn't need anger anymore. I needed evidence, and they were handing it to me with open arms. When I finally had everything I needed, I sat at my kitchen table late one night with all the files spread around me. Emails, signed forms, bank statements, and audio clips. Every piece of paper told a story of greed, and I had enough to bring their world down. My hands trembled, not from guilt, but from the strange calm that comes before doing something irreversible. I looked at Lila's picture beside me, her smile bright and fearless, and whispered, "This is for you." The next morning, I made an appointment with someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Evan Turner, my old high school classmate who now worked as a senior accountant. Back then, he was the quiet kid who never cheated, even when everyone else did. I found his office number online and called, keeping my voice low. "I have information about financial fraud," I said. "It involves Russell Ellison's company." I didn't give my name. I didn't have to. When I met him, I wore a simple gray coat and kept my hair tied back. Evan didn't recognize me right away. I handed him a flash drive in a plain envelope. "These are financial records, all tied to Russell Ellison's firm," I said, keeping my voice even. "Unreported income, double books, false deductions, the works. I can't tell you who I am, but I think the IRS should see this." He frowned, clearly torn between curiosity and duty. "If this is real," he said carefully, "it could mean serious trouble." "It's real," I said quietly, and then walked away before he could ask another question. That night, I took care of the other part of my plan. I logged into my late husband's account, the inheritance that I'd mentioned before, and moved every cent into a new private savings account under Lila's name, one that only I could access. I didn't trust anyone else again, not after what had happened. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to restart the surgery process. Enough to give my daughter hope. 2 weeks later, my parents called me in a panic. My mother's voice cracked through the phone. "Kara, do you know what's happening? The IRS just showed up. They're auditing us. Your father's office, his files, everything." I kept my voice neutral. "That's strange," I said. "Maybe it's routine?" They had no idea the walls were closing in because of me. I could picture my father pacing in his office, sweat running down his temples, while my mother tried to act calm but failed. The auditors weren't fooled by charm or excuses. They started pulling records, cross-checking accounts, uncovering hidden transfers and shell properties. Everything I had found was now in their hands. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't shout or accuse. I simply waited and watched quietly as their proud, perfect image began to collapse under the weight of their own lies. They thought it was a coincidence, just bad luck. But I knew better. The trap had finally snapped shut, and there was no escaping it. The news came slowly at first, a whisper from a neighbor, a short article in the local business section, then a flood of stories about Russell Ellison's company being under investigation. Every day, another piece of their carefully built life cracked apart. My parents tried to keep up appearances, but the panic showed in their faces. My father's office was half empty, his phone ringing non-stop with calls he didn't want to answer. My mother stopped posting photos of fancy dinners and family gatherings. Instead, she stayed inside with the curtains drawn, snapping at anyone who dared to ask questions. When the state announced formal charges for tax fraud and false reporting, it was over. My father's employees left one by one. His clients disappeared, too scared to be connected to him. The company that had once made him so proud, Ellison Realty, was finished. The accounts were frozen, and every asset was under review. They tried to act like it was temporary, but I could see the truth written across their tired faces. A week later, their house was seized. I watched from a distance as men carried boxes out to trucks, paintings, furniture, even the piano my mother loved to show off during parties. My father stood in the driveway, shoulders slumped, arguing with the officers about what they could take. My mother stood behind him, arms crossed, glaring at the world like it had betrayed her. When she caught sight of me parked across the street, her eyes narrowed. That evening, she called. "You," she hissed through the phone. "You had something to do with this. Don't you dare lie to me." I kept my tone calm. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mom. Maybe you should talk to your accountant." She hung up, furious, and I knew she suspected the truth, but suspicion wasn't proof. There was nothing linking me to what happened. Everything I'd done had been careful, quiet, invisible. A few days later, my father showed up at my door. He looked older than I remembered, gray hair uncombed, his hands shaking. "Kara," he said softly, "we need help. They've taken everything. Your mother's not doing well. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I almost felt pity. This was the man who taught me to ride a bike, who fixed my broken toys. But then I remembered the empty bank account, the hospital bills, and the sound of his calm voice saying, "We only borrowed it." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You took from a child who trusted you," I said. "Now you're living with the cost." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He just stood there, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not as a daughter, but as someone he'd underestimated. That was the last time I saw them together. My father moved into a small rental. My mother stayed angry and bitter, blaming everyone but herself. The proud Ellison family that once preached loyalty and respect had fallen apart, crushed under their own lies. And this time, I didn't have to lift a finger. The day of Lila's surgery came quietly, without fanfare, without family. The sky was pale and still, the air heavy with that strange hospital smell that mixes fear and hope together. I held her tiny hand as nurses wheeled her toward the operating room, and she looked up at me, smiling with the bravery only children have. "It's okay, Mommy," she whispered. "My heart's gonna be fixed." I kissed her forehead, nodded, and watched her disappear behind those double doors. I sat in the waiting room for hours, staring at the same tiled floor, hearing the same beeping from machines down the hall. Every second stretched into forever. Around me, other families whispered prayers, clutched coffee cups, or wept into their hands. I felt nothing but a heavy ache, relief, fear, exhaustion all tangled together. Getting here had been harder than anyone knew. After everything fell apart with my parents, I'd taken what was left of my savings and applied for a community grant tied to Ben's veteran benefits. The process was slow and full of red tape, but it finally came through. Between that grant and the money I'd protected, I had just enough for Lila's operation and recovery. For the first time in years, I didn't have to beg, borrow, or trust anyone but myself. When the surgeon finally came out, his eyes were kind. "It went beautifully," he said. "She's stable, and the repair looks strong. You can see her soon." The words sank into me slowly, like sunlight after too many cold days. My knees went weak, and I sat down, pressing my hands to my face. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. There was only silence inside me, an emptiness shaped like relief. Later, I stood by her bed, watching her chest rise and fall beneath a web of tubes and monitors. Her little heart, the one I'd fought so hard to save, was beating stronger now. I whispered, "You're safe, baby. You made it." She stirred slightly, and even in sleep, she looked peaceful. That was enough. A few days later, after the doctors confirmed she was healing well, I drove to my parents' neighborhood. Their house was gone now, sold off to cover debts, but they were renting a small duplex across town. I sat in my car outside for a long time, staring at the worn curtains and cracked steps. Then I got out and knocked. My father opened the door. He looked thin, tired, older. My mother stood behind him, her face pale and wary. "Why are you here?" she asked. I kept my voice steady. "I just wanted you to know Lila's surgery went perfectly. She's home soon." My mother's eyes flickered, as if she wanted to say something, but I didn't let her. "That's all," I said quietly. "I thought you should know." I turned and walked away. They didn't deserve to see her, to see what their betrayal almost destroyed. Lila had a new heart, and I had peace. But family? That part was gone forever. Months passed, and life slowly found a quiet rhythm again. Lila's recovery was steady, her laughter filling the house like music I hadn't heard in years. Every heartbeat she took felt like a reminder of why I had done everything I did. For once, I could breathe without fear. Still, sometimes at night, when the house was silent, the memories of my parents' betrayal crept back in like a draft through a closed door. I wondered what had become of them, not out of longing, but out of the strange curiosity that comes with unfinished chapters. One afternoon, I found out by accident. A woman from church mentioned that she'd seen my father working at a supply store in a nearby town. She said he looked worn down, his hands rough, his back bent. My mother, she added, wasn't with him. She mostly stayed home, barely speaking to neighbors. They'd moved into a small rental, a plain one-story place with peeling paint and a sagging fence. "It's sad," the woman said gently. "They used to have everything." I just nodded. I didn't feel triumph, just quiet understanding. Life had already done what I never needed to. Their punishment wasn't mine to give. It came naturally. Every morning they woke up in that tiny house with the weight of their choices pressing down on them. Sometimes distant relatives tried to reach out. An aunt called once, her voice awkward and pleading. "They're not the same, Kara," she said. "Your mom's been sick. Your dad's trying to make ends meet. They made a mistake, but they're still your parents. Maybe it's time to forgive and forget." I listened silently until she finished, then thanked her for calling and hung up. I didn't shout or explain. I didn't tell her that forgiveness didn't erase what they'd done, that it wasn't about money but about trust. They had stolen from a child who couldn't defend herself, and from me, the daughter who believed in them. Some things can't be repaired. Over the next few months, a few more calls came, always from people trying to patch things that weren't theirs to fix. I stopped answering. I didn't block the numbers, I just let them ring. I realized that silence was its own kind of answer. When I passed through their town one day for errands, I drove by the rental house. The curtains were drawn tight, and my father's old truck sat rusting in the driveway. I sat there for a moment, just long enough to feel the ache fade into something softer. Not pity, not anger, just acceptance. They had chosen greed over love, and life had taken care of the rest. I didn't need revenge anymore. Every morning they woke up to smaller lives, emptier rooms, and memories of what they'd lost. That was their consequence. As I drove away, I looked at the road ahead, feeling lighter than I had in years. Peace wasn't about forgiving them. It was about finally being free of them. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting a soft golden glow over the porch. Lila sat beside me, her laughter bright and unrestrained as she played with the little wind chime she'd made at therapy. Each soft ring of metal sounded like life, pure, healing, and whole. For the first time in years, she could laugh without wincing, breathe without struggle. I watched her tiny hands reach for the sky, the faint scar on her chest barely visible now. My heart filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. The house was quiet except for her laughter and the distant hum of cicadas. It wasn't the biggest house or the fanciest, but it was ours. Every brick, every flower in the garden, every corner carried the story of what we had survived. I used to think peace meant forgiving those who hurt me. I thought I'd need to find closure through their apology. But sitting there, watching Lila's joy ripple through the air, I realized peace doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from freedom. I didn't forgive my parents. I didn't need to. Forgiveness felt like giving them another piece of me, and I had already given enough. What I chose instead was to move on without their shadow looming over my life. They had taken $68,000 meant to save my child's life, but in truth, they stole something far greater. The last bit of trust one had left for them. And trust, once broken, doesn't grow back. I remembered the nights I spent working double shifts, thinking my parents were helping keep that money safe. I remembered how I believed in their words about family and loyalty. It was hard not to let bitterness grow from those memories. But now, as I sat on the porch, I realized that bitterness had no place in the life I was rebuilding. Lila leaned against me, her head resting on my arm. "Mom," she said softly, "are you happy now?" I smiled at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yeah, baby. I am." She nodded and turned her gaze back toward the setting sun. That small, simple moment was enough. I didn't need apologies, explanations, or reconciliation. What mattered most was sitting here with my daughter alive and safe, surrounded by peace that no one could steal. Some debts can't be repaid in money. They're written in trust, in love, in the quiet bonds that hold families together. My parents had broken that bond beyond repair. I didn't hate them anymore, but I didn't miss them either. They had chosen greed over love, and the consequence was losing the one thing they could never buy back, their daughter. As the sky turned pink and the wind carried the sound of Lila's laughter across the yard, I whispered to myself, "They stole from my baby. And in doing so, they lost their daughter forever." Do you think Kara made the right choice by cutting her parents out of her life? Or should she have given them another chance? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this touch your heart, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.